May it please the court, Mr. Deemer, members of the jury, good morning. You met Ms. Engelhardt yesterday. She's the lead prosecutor on this case. My name is Adam Field, and I'm going to be assisting her in representing the state of Missouri in this case. I want to be really clear with all of you about something. This case is not about an accident. This case is about an utter disregard for the value of human life, the dignity, the basic dignity of human life. The evidence will show that disregard reflected through a series of choices that the defendant made on February 18th last year. It was not an accident when the defendant got behind the wheel of an Audi with no driver's license. It was not an accident when the defendant got behind the wheel of that car, a 4,000-pound SUV with fentanyl, THC, and codeine in his blood. And it was not an accident when the defendant pushed the gas pedal to the floor, stretching the maximum performance of that vehicle to accelerate in 5 seconds in half of an alley block to 20 miles over the speed limit and blow through a yield sign. That was reckless. And there were consequences to those choices that the defendant made. Consequences that we want you to hold the defendant responsible for. This is Janae Edmondson. Janae is from Smyrna, Tennessee, and last year on February 18, 2023, she was here in downtown St. Louis, for a volleyball tournament. The Friday before that, she was playing in a basketball tournament, so they got into St. Louis early that morning, around 2 a.m. She had games that afternoon. She had 3 games. And she drove up from Tennessee with her mom and her dad. And you're going to hear from James Edmondson Jr., her dad, Francine Edmondson, her mom, and you're going to hear from Janae. Her last game that night, February 18th, started at about 7:30. So by 8:30, the game was over. She won her first 2 games. She didn't win her last game, but it was a close game. And the only thing that the Edmondsons had nothing to be concerned about. They had no thought on their mind about what was going to happen that night. They were talking about what they were going to eat for dinner. They walked So this is the intersection here of St. Charles Street, which is an alley sort of behind Lofts here, and then this is the Vanguard Lofts at 1100 Washington Avenue, and the America Center is just up here. So Janae, after that volleyball game, they got out around 8:30. She's walking down Washington Avenue with mom and dad. They're talking about pizza or Cane's chicken fingers, and they get to North 11th Street. The Edmondsons had parked a Silver Road, the car they drove up in, down here on St. Charles Street. I think we all know what it's like to find parking downtown when there's a busy event. And so that's where they wound up. They're walking south on North 11th Street along here till they get to this corner. And at that corner is where all hell broke loose. James Edmondson, who you'll hear from this morning, will tell you that he heard a roar, and he turned and he saw an Audi driven by the defendant barreling towards them. And at first they're standing just off the curb. They have the right of way, actually. There's a yield sign on the east side of St. Charles right here. But they know he's not going to stop. They know he's not going to stop And that fact is so obvious to them that they start running back to the curb for their life. And Mr. Edmondson does not leave his daughter. He tries to grab her. And the next thing that he hears, and you will hear that yourself when we play a video of the collision, sounded like a grenade going off. It gave Mr. Edmondson a flashback to his training from the military. Literally. Mr. Edmondson said that Audi was like a 4,000-pound missile barreling down St. Charles Street. And in the next moment after that crash, and what that sound is there's a Chevy Malibu with the right-of-way going north on 11th Street. There's no traffic control device here. There's no stop sign or yield sign for this traffic. Like I said, St. Charles Street is basically an alley. There's a yield sign here on that northeast corner. That Malibu, driven by Elizabeth Smith, who you'll also hear from this morning, has no time to react. She's, at the moment of impact, you'll hear evidence that she's driving basically the speed limit, basically 25 miles per hour. That in the 5 seconds before impact, that car doesn't get over 29 miles per hour. And his car enters the intersection. The Malibu impacts the rear driver's side of the car, and that 4,000-pound Audi goes airborne. And it goes right towards Janae and right towards the Edmondsons. And there's a parked Toyota Corolla on the north side of St. Charles Street here that the Edmondsons were standing behind as they are turning to run back. And Janae is running when that car, that Audi, comes flying into her legs, traumatically amputating immediately essentially both legs, one below the knee and one above the knee. And that's because she's running for her life. And after that happens, something really remarkable happens. You'll hear about the consequences, and I'll get into that in a moment, about the injuries that Janae suffered. But in that moment, when Mr. Edmondson is having a flashback about grenade training, you'll hear that he served in the military for over 10 years. His first thought is to start asking bystanders for belts to apply the tourniquet. He doesn't give himself a second to process this. He immediately goes into, after seeing that, which nobody should ever see or have to see or be afraid for their life to cross the street with the right of way, he goes into life-saving mode for his daughter. Janae survives. And that is amazing. Yesterday, Mr. Deemer talked about, I think, injury instructions in the context of one element we're going to prove for you through the evidence. It's serious physical injury and assault in the second degree. And I think Mr. Deemer used the analogy that the state's going to meet that, the glass is going to be overflowing. I agree with that characterization. Janae had damage to the artery inside her pelvis. She had a bulging blood vessel on the artery in her right pelvis, blood pooling outside the main artery, her aorta, from her heart. She had bruising to both lungs. She had a moderate tear to her liver. Blood was also collecting in her abdomen, around her intestines and liver. She had complete loss of blood supply to one kidney, severe injury to that same kidney, and as I said before, traumatic amputation eventually of both legs. And fractured, you'll hear, fractures to her pelvic bone such that she cannot have a natural childbirth. This was not an accident. You will hear from Mr. Edmondson that when Janae woke up in the hospital, that family has to tell Janae that her legs are gone. And that's not the hardest part of that conversation because Janae knows her legs are gone. The hardest part for Mr. Edmondson is when Janae asks, why did this happen? And members of the jury, the judge will supply you with the law in this case at the end of the case. But this is the question that you are called upon to answer. And the state will prove to you the defendant is charged with assault in the second degree, armed criminal action, 2 counts of assault in the 4th degree, and a count of operating a motor vehicle without a driver's license. The state will prove to you, and you'll get the elements for all of those, the jury instructions at the end of the case. But what I expect the evidence to show is that the defendant perceived a substantial risk causing serious physical injury. That he made more than one decision to disregard that risk to the lives of the other people on the road. And that he accomplished that causing serious physical injury to Janae through the use of a dangerous instrument. Yesterday in jury selection, there were questions asked about whether we thought in the context of everyone sharing their experiences with having motor vehicle accidents themselves, whether cars were weapons, and do I think that a steering wheel in the wrong hands is a weapon? Yes, but that's not what the state is going to.
Hold on. Your objection is to say not what you think, but Field is what the evidence will show.
Yes, Your Honor. As the judge will instruct you at the end of the case, that's not what the state's burden is in this case. The state will not prove through the evidence that the car is a weapon. The state will have to prove that a 4,000-pound Audi is a dangerous instrument, and the state will prove that. The state will prove that the defendant knew that a 4,000-pound Audi was readily capable of causing serious physical injury. That is common sense. We know that when we put our seatbelt on. We know that when we see the markings for airbags in the car. We know that when we have to get our driver's license to pass tests. We know that when we have to
overrule, you can continue.
When we have to carry liability insurance for personal injuries to others. We understand cars are not designed to be dangerous, but they can be very easily in the wrong hands. You'll hear today from Mr. Edmondson. You'll hear from Elizabeth Smith. They'll tell you about this first day of their life. I expect you'll also hear from this morning or this afternoon the officers who had to respond to the scene. And when I talk about a complete and utter disregard for the value of human life, I want you to pay attention to the evidence about the defense demeanor after this happens. You'll hear from Officer Bridget Fernie, who speaks with the defendant at the scene, and how he is feet away from a crowd of people trying to save a 17-year-old girl's life, and his main concern is whether he can get his second cell phone out of the car, and not being able to comprehend that that might be part of an investigation. You'll also hear from police officers who go to the hospital and interview the defendant, who draw his blood, And again, I want you to pay attention to the defendant's demeanor when he's speaking to those officers. You will hear in that interview, you will hear through the testimony that the defendant says, "A girl lost her leg, that's all. Is something serious going to happen?" The purpose of this evidence is to show you the defendant's state of mind. I told you this case is about respect for the value of human life and how when we disregard that, there are consequences that we must be held accountable for. Finally, you'll hear from a number of experts from the state. You'll hear from a toxicologist from the Missouri State Highway Patrol to tell you about the results of blood tests performed on blood drawn from the defendant from the hospital. They detected fentanyl, THC metabolites, codeine in his blood at the time. And that's also evidence of the defendant's state of mind. We know that when we take substances,
I'm going to object, Your Honor, unless you bring
Sustained.
evidence about that. That's
Your
impossible.
objection is sustained.
you'll hear from Eric Moran from the St. Louis Police Department's from the Traffic Safety Unit. He's a trained accident reconstruction expert. He'll tell you about how he recreated the sequence of events of that crash from the evidence at the scene, from the marks, from the tire marks, the damage, and how he downloaded, think of it as the black boxes, they're called airbag control modules off the Malibu and the Audi, which record data about the speed of the vehicle, steering input, brake input, accelerator input, G-forces on the vehicle in 3 axes, and what that allowed, what opinions he drew from that data. And then you'll also hear from Tom Morris, who is not a police officer. Tom Morris is a ACTAR accredited, that's a National Association of Accident Reconstruction Experts, professional, who consults with the city in certain cases. And the police did not just rely on the black box data. Mr. Morris will tell you about how he calculated the speed range of the Audi using 3 different other methods, and how it was consistent with the black box data in every case. And he will show you 3D reconstructions that he created of this accident. So that you can see from every angle, every perspective, what would have been apparent to the people at the scene and how that accident likely transpired. Finally, you'll hear from Janae and Francine. They'll tell you about how this incident has impacted their life, about how they live with the consequences of the defendant's actions, and how those consequences will last forever. This case is not about an accident. It's a case about a series of choices that the defendant made. And the state is not going to ask you to do anything other than hold the defendant accountable for the choices that he made on your streets. At the end of the case, we'll ask you to return verdicts of guilty. Thank you.